My name's Johnny Bueno, and my experience with Shadows of Doubt has taught me that I'd make a horrible detective. Shadows of Doubt is a sandbox detective simulator where you can solve crimes through gratuitous violence. Or at least that's how I solved crimes. Really, there are many ways you can go about identifying and arresting a cold-blooded murderer, and that open nature, combined with a procedurally generated world, is what makes this game so addicting to play. The premise is simple: solve murders and complete jobs to earn money. In addition to money, you'll earn social credits, and once you've amassed enough social credits, your player-made character can finally hang up your detective hat and retire. You'll be doing this on a city island where the names of buildings, the streets, and even the denizens are all randomly generated, so every new game you start feels unique, and no case will feel exactly the same. One thing I liked is that despite the open world not being that large, the building density and the various citizens you'll see going about their day make it feel very much alive. It gives the players a big city vibe despite the fact that everything takes place on a small island. The citizens themselves, though, are completely unnamed, and unless you've identified them via a personal ID, they'll simply be called Unknown Citizen. This is where one of the prime tenets of Shadow of Doubt comes into play. Information is key. Naturally, as a detective, your role is to gather as much information as possible when investigating a murder to identify who done it, what did they use to do it, where do they live, and what evidence proves that they did it. But before figuring all of that out, you first need to identify who got. It becomes clear pretty quickly that you're not the traditional type of detective that the authorities simply allow to enter a crime scene, as you'll be shot at for stepping 1 pixel into the doorway of the victim's apartment. So, to solve a crime, we first need to commit the crime of unlawful entry. This could include sneaking into the apartment via air vents, or simply walking right in because the enforcer guarding the apartment glitched out and is now stuck in the air with no way to stop you. Once inside, it's time to gather evidence. IDing your victim is as simple as investigating the body and finding their identification, which is, from what I've seen, usually conveniently left out on a table in the open. Now it's time to scan for fingerprints. This is usually the key factor that ties a potential suspect to the crime scene once you find out whose hand the prints belong to. That is, if the suspect left any prints. There were a few cases I took on where the killer left no prints on the scene, making identifying them all the more difficult. But the thing about Shadows of Doubt is that somehow makes the case all the more exciting because there's something so satisfying about hunting down that key piece of information that gives you a breakthrough on a case. After gathering additional evidence, like the victim's workplace, or if you're lucky, getting a note where the killer literally gives their own name away, it's time to take to the streets. This is where the sandbox nature of Shadows of Doubt truly shines. You need to find out what to investigate next, and you're free to be as much of a degenerate as possible to get the next key piece of evidence. This is also where solving crimes with violence comes into play. Suspect won't let you scan their fingerprints even though you ask nicely. Beat them unconscious and take their prints by force. Just make sure there are no witnesses. Suspect's lover/roommate wakes up while you're performing an arrest on them in the middle of the night in their own bed. Knock them out for obstructing justice. Just need to take a shower because your character is stinky? Break into someone's apartment and get into a wet fistfight. Showers really are important though, because if you're under the stinky status, people can smell you before they see you, and it becomes much harder to sneak around other people's homes. If there's one thing that Shadows of Doubt has taught me, it's that when it comes to serving cold, hard justice, warrants are optional. Some of the non-violent aspects of solving a case can include spending hours climbing through air vents to gain access to a victim or suspect's workplace. Just like everything else in the game, the structure of the air vents are also randomly generated and don't always get you access to your intended location. You can also hack into computers, or crunchers as they're called in-game, to access personal information or view surveillance footage if you're at a business establishment. I use the term hack lightly because the access code to a specific cruncher is usually scribbled on a note in the same room. All of these methods of investigation can factor into a case that can take several hours to solve, and if you take too long, more people will end up dead at the hands of the killer. On one hand, another murder means you get more evidence to help identify a suspect. On the other hand, well, another person is dead. Investigating a murder is in fact a very lengthy goose chase where you're constantly hunting down critical info to uncover the next piece of critical info. For example, you find out your victim met with someone at a diner, and you need to access the diner's surveillance camera to see who they met with. But you can't access the cruncher containing the surveillance footage without an access code, and of course this time you actually have to hunt for the code, as the owner set it to an acquaintance's birth year. You then need to identify the person whose birth year is the access code, break into their apartment to find their ID, and then take it back to the cruncher. You can then use the cruncher to page through hours of surveillance footage to find what you need, while the cruncher's owner watches you use their property. This is just one example of a string of events that can take place during a case, and while it might sound tedious, I enjoyed every second of it. Because, like I said before, uncovering a crucial piece of info that brought me closer to solving a case gave me an endorphin boost I never knew I needed. In all honesty, playing Shadows of Doubt makes me feel smarter than I actually am. I'm then reminded how dumb and unorganized I am when it comes to the game's murder board. What could have been an organized board of connecting key suspects to fingerprints and locations ends up being an incoherent mess of phone numbers, notes, and people who have nothing to do with the case at all. They are fun to put together, though. You can pin building locations and plot a route to them so they're easier to navigate to. This was incredibly helpful as, despite the island's small size, I somehow still found myself getting lost amongst the tall buildings and many restaurants and businesses. Not to mention, many of the larger buildings are like 20 stories tall, so it's nice to have an arrow telling me exactly where I need to go. Between murder cases, you can also pick up smaller jobs to earn some cash. This can include a demolition job, which essentially has you trash someone's apartment. My first demolition job was pretty unique. I picked it up from a man who went by the name of Lai, and he wanted me to trash an apartment in Johannesson Tower. After heading to the apartment, I found the ID of the intended target for the job, Nova Hodges. After doing a fair bit of damage, I noticed that Nova Hodges didn't live alone. Her roommate, an individual with the last name of Lai. Meaning, this man essentially hired me to trash his own apartment to scare and intimidate the individual he lived with. Apparently for Mr. Lai, sending a message is far more important than broken windows and destroyed possessions. In addition to demolition jobs, you can also work with the city's enforcers to arrest individuals or recover a citizen's stolen item. You're free to do these jobs until the inevitable message shows up that another murder has been reported. Or you can work on these cases while also investigating a murder if you think recovering someone's stolen sports card is just as important as someone's life. While solving crimes, you'll also be treated to some light survival elements that you'll need to keep an eye on. I've already mentioned being stinky, but your character will also get hungry and thirsty over time, in addition to suffering from the cold and rainy weather. Get too cold and your character will start shivering, which at first made me think my game was glitching out or there was some sort of in-game earthquake happening. Staying out in the rain will get you wet, and if you run while wet, your character will occasionally slip and fall. Also, when you inevitably get into a violent conflict, your character can get broken limbs and wounds, which will need a splint or bandage to fix up. It's not necessary for survival, but you can also get completely hammered and stumble around the local sink clinic. Because after spending hours solving crimes, sometimes a detective just needs a stiff drink and a place to lie down. The last thing I want to touch on is the bugs, of which there are many. Shadows of Doubt is an early access game, and it definitely shows. I've seen NPCs walking through the air, as well as getting stuck in midair and somehow getting naked when I cut line of sight with them. I also clipped through walls several times and got completely stuck after jumping out of a window at one point, forcing me to reload a save from way earlier in my playthrough since the game doesn't have an autosave feature. But I do understand why there's no autosave, as every decision you make and every consequence because of that decision matters. So if you want to give Shadows of Doubt a shot, be aware that it may not be a perfect experience and you're going to want to save often, very often. Despite these issues, Shadows of Doubt brought me an experience I had no idea I would enjoy so much. The procedurally generated worlds and sandbox-style gameplay that lets you do all sorts of depraved acts in the name of justice gives the game tons of replayability. And everything from identifying a victim to stealthing around and gathering evidence to eventually arresting a suspect teases the brain in such a satisfying yet not overly frustrating way. This isn't a genre of game I would normally be interested in, but I'm so glad I gave it a shot, as I'll no doubt be coming back to solve mysteries and violently assault suspects many, many more times. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and let me know what you think in the comments below. I appreciate every bit of interaction and support, as I love making videos just like this. So please subscribe if you want to see more, and as always, thank you for watching.